I begin by making room for a phrase that spans generations. Feeling is the secret. Neville Goddard. Said slowly, it repositions everything. It's not the force that creates, it's the state felt. In 2025, calling this Manifestation 2.0 isn't a fad, it's precision. When you push, the field closes, like a room where the air thins. When you tune in, the room breathes and the doors open silently. The secret isn't shouting your desire, it's carrying the frequency of desire, like someone wearing a skin that already belongs to them. Maybe you've tried everything, late-night affirmations, vision boards, spreadsheet goals, and yet life seems to be slow to respond. Constant effort exacts invisible toll. The body hardens, the mind grows wary, the heart loses its timbre. The feeling of almost accumulates like dust on the shelves, and each attempt becomes proof of lack, not potency. What I propose here is a delicate and radical shift, stepping out of the box and into the field. I call field what much tradition has called spirit and which contemporary physics still sketches, a network of relationships where attention, emotion, and meaning intertwine. Jargon doesn't matter, management matters. Manifestation isn't a hunt, it's a convergence. The useful question isn't how do I achieve it, but what state within me makes it inevitable that this will find me. When this state stabilizes, the world rearranges the shortest path. To cement this, I offer a metaphor that will stay with us until the end: radio and dial. The station doesn't appear because you angrily press the button. It appears when the dial shifts to a new band. The noise that remains is what you haven't yet modulated: old fear, comparison, urgency. It is in this inversion that life regains its grace. Action ceases to be correction and becomes the expression of an already coherent state. This video is a layered map. First, the price of not modulating, then the rule of the world with the dial metaphor, then the conflict that steals your signal, the myth that needs to be dispelled, the framework for you to find your bearings, the turning point where the quote returns with a different meaning, the method in testable steps, and finally, the metaphor's payoff with tangible gains. If any part touches a nerve, it's because the field is crying out for adjustment. In 60 seconds, we begin with the costs of ignoring this discrete art. When you try to create reality by pushing, the bill doesn't come in numbers. It comes in your body and your bonds. First, it appears as sleepless fatigue, then as insomnia that makes the night feel like a doorless hallway. The next day, your mind monitors every gesture as if it were an audit, and any delay becomes evidence that it's not working. Gradually, enthusiasm turns to cynicism, and you isolate yourself so as not to lose the frequency, ironically losing the life you wanted to expand. The bill arrives in the form of exhaustion, insomnia, cynicism, and isolation. On a small scale, the curse begins quietly. You wake up, take a shallow breath, open your phone, searching for signals, and affirmations become a correction of a defect, not a celebration of the encounter. Your chest tightens, your jaw locks, and the silence that should fine-tune the signal becomes filled with mental noise. You say, it's just focus, but you spend the day trying to adjust the world with the wrench of willpower. In this regime, attention becomes hypersensitive, like a wide open window. It brings light, but also dust, horns, and cold wind. An open window brings light and noise. On a medium scale, The search for the ideal job or home becomes a test of neediness with every no along the way. The body goes into a hormonal sprint. At night, shallow sleep. In the morning, coffee overflowing with cortisol. And the mind sells haste as a strategy. You check ads on a loop, measure responses in minutes, and turn silence into a sentence. The field that should self-organize receives contradictory instructions. Come now, test now, show signal, and the dial saturates with static. The bill arrives in the form of distance, distrust, and an energetic hangover that won't go away. The worst part is that trying to resolve the excess with more techniques adds noise to the noise itself. You open more windows, collect more mantras, change methods like changing stations, and each adjustment becomes a micro shock on the dial. The cumulative effect is a hyper-stimulated field that doesn't sustain convergence, only micro peaks of euphoria. This is how a blessing becomes a curse. The gift of feeling, unmanaged, explodes from excess and fades out of defense. The price of not modulating is living with peaks and troughs, losing precisely the stability that would allow for the right. There's a simple rule that guides everything we'll do from now on. Every gift is an opening, and openings need management. When you open too much, you explode. When you close too much, you fade. That's why mastery isn't raw power, it's modulation. In real-life terms, this means exchanging an obsession with intensity for the art of calibrating what you feel before acting. The field doesn't respond to slogans, it responds to the coherence the body can sustain without breaking. It's this lens that transforms manifesting from racing to convergence. To prevent this lens from becoming jargon, let's define the terms operationally. I call it a coherent state when intention and affect are on the same side, and the body doesn't contradict what the mouth says. I call frequency here the combined timbre of your breathing, your attention, and the meaning you give to what happens. Manifestation 2.0 is simply this: calibrating the state that makes the encounter probable instead of demanding proof from the world before feeling. The force that pushes creates noise. The coherence that grounds invites the shortcut that was not yet visible. The metaphor we'll use is that of the radio and the dial, because it fits in your pocket and comes back paid for at the end. The station doesn't appear because you press the button in anger. It appears when the dial enters the band and the hiss subsides. In everyday life, the hiss is the mixture of old fear, comparison, and urgency that distorts the reading of what's actually available. Our practice, then, isn't to shout louder, it's to turn millimeters until the music becomes clear enough to guide the next step. Promise made, this image returns at the end with a greater meaning. If you need a concrete image, think of the invitation that doesn't arrive when you insist, but appears when you organize your day to accommodate the version of yourself that has already agreed to say yes. You don't hijack the opportunity, you find it because you stopped editing the world and started editing your rhythm. The algorithm of people and circumstances recognizes fewer words and more stability. When your tone changes, the other person's filter changes with it. The result seems coincidental, but it's just the natural consequence of a signal that was clear long enough to be perceived as inevitable. This is the basis. Manifesting without forcing isn't about giving up action. It's about changing the order of factors. First, you feel clearly, Then you move, as if simply confirming what's already playing. The diagnosis becomes simple. Changing the force amplifies the noise. Changing the state clears the channel. As we now descend into the territory where the noise originates, and understand how the gift becomes a burden when the dial is skewed layer by layer, from the body to the relationships and the environment. It's from this conflict map that the right adjustment begins to make sense. Early in the morning, an untimely message triggers the old control reflex, and the body shuts down. Breathing shortens, the chest forms a thick armor, and the mind races to create parallel plans, as if the how needed to happen now. You try to feel gratitude, but the nervous system yields vigilance, not coherence, and any silence becomes a threat. The mechanism is simple and cruel. Stimulus triggers emotion, emotion hijacks attention, attention creates a narrative of urgency, and the narrative drives hasty decisions. The side effect appears in the day's skewed readings. A delay becomes a refusal, a coincidence becomes a crumb, and the body withdraws investment from the places that demand presence. Instead of turning back the dial and clearing the noise, you turn up the volume of your techniques and try to drown out the noise with more noise. With each attempt to force the state distances itself a little further, because the field recognizes tension masked as faith. The pushing force says go, but the listening body responds no, and this divergence is the friction that consumes the gift from within. In relationships, the same script takes on a new light. You enter an important conversation determined to manifest the outcome, pile on arguments, offer proof of your worth too soon, and without realizing it, inject pressure into the air. On the other side, the person senses the pressure, takes a half step back, and begins listening to defend themselves, not to get closer. Here, too, there's a traceable mechanism. Expectation inflames emotion. Emotion narrows attention. Attention produces a narrative of scarcity, and the narrative pushes a decision to control. When charm gives way to insistence, the social realm closes in on silence. At the systemic level, the environment trains urgency and comparison as if they were virtues. The feed delivers dopamine spikes. The clock, sliced by notifications, sets the pace, and you measure value by response latency. 10 tabs open, and with them, 10 future competitors vying for attention. The dial saturates until the music fades. The algorithm only registers signals of engagement, not coherence, so the reward comes to those who shout the loudest, not those who tune in best. The result? Stimulus industrializes emotion. Emotion industrializes captive attention. Attention fuels narratives of inadequacy, and decisions begin to obey the external clock. When the 3 layers overlap, the gift becomes a predictable burden. Inside, you discipline yourself to the point of rigidity. Outside, you try to convince yourself to exhaustion. Around you, nothing cooperates because the environment is designed to distract. It's not a character flaw, it's a lack of control over the dial, and that's why increasing the power worsens the hiss. What relieves isn't amputating desire, it's modulating presence until the body, the conversation, and the environment all recognize the same frequency. In 1 minute, a simple map to help you find your way. The most seductive myth says that if you have unwavering focus and willpower, everything becomes easier. It seems noble because it rewards those who tighten their grip, but it confuses power with rigidity and state with effort. When you believe that tightening is always the way forward, you turn every desire into an internal auditor, and your body begins to monitor your own soul. The life that only moves forward by jerks, like a car with the handbrake on. The trap isn't in the wanting, it's in the way of wanting that implodes the signal. Gift here is the sensitivity to feel and direct meaning. Management is the art of dosing this gift so it doesn't overwhelm you. Without management, the gift takes its toll. You pay with chronic tension, hasty decisions, and bonds that tire too soon. Pure focus without fine-tuning is a crooked spotlight. It illuminates what's in front of you and blinds you to the side doors. The emphasis on forcing the path shortens your breathing, impoverishes your reading of the environment, and leaves you deaf to the synchronicities that require silence to approach. The myth sells speed. The bill arrives as friction. Consider 3 micro cases. At work, more hours and more tabs don't bring the best. It arrives the day you reduce noise, stabilize your presence, and respond to an email with half a clear paragraph. In relationships, convincing speech doesn't open hearts. What opens hearts is the rhythm that doesn't pressure and leaves room for the other person to breathe. In the body, morning checklists promise power but become self-demanding. When you change the morning's rhythm, half an hour of centering is worth more than 3 of correction. In all, the trade-off is the same: less brute force, more felt coherence. The counterexample is useful. You once achieved something by pushing, and for a few weeks it worked. Then, the emotional maintenance cost outweighed the gain, and what seemed like a victory became a drain. This doesn't invalidate the desire. It just reveals that a crooked path exacts a greater toll. When the belief, no effort is worth it, you choose zigzag routes for the pleasure of suffering, confusing suffering with meaning. Cutting the myth isn't about giving up on yourself. It's about stopping paying dearly for the wrong shortcut. So what's the reframe? Gift without management takes its toll. And management, in this context, is modulating before accelerating. Dosing isn't amputating. It's adjusting the dial so that the willpower muscle works within a rhythm the body can sustain. Willpower remains important, but it shifts from an anxious driver to an attentive co-pilot, offering clarity rather than pressure. That's why Manifestation 2.0 swaps how I force for how I sustain the long note without breaking. When the note holds, the field finds you on the path of least friction. The bridge to a turning point is straightforward. Abandoning the myth doesn't make you passive. It makes you available for the fine-tuning that the push prevents. The next step isn't shouting louder. It's organizing criteria that show, live, whether you're opening too much or closing out defensively. That's what our map provides below, a simple diagnosis to pinpoint the deviation and regain your footing. With the myth dismantled, the ground is clear to design the framework that separates noise from music and restores agency without violence. The map starts simple. On one side, it's open without filtering. On the other, it's closing defensively. And in the center, it's modulating with criteria that fit real life. Modulating here means observing 3 markers in real time and adjusting before overreaction. Body tension that rises to the shoulders and jaw, screen time that disorganizes attention, and response latency that signals urgency or escape. When these 3 pointers converge, the signal becomes clear enough for action to be a consequence, not a correction. The goal of the framework is for you to know which edge you're on and how far you need to return to the center with the least possible friction. Opening up without a filter is confusing sensitivity with infinite availability. You say yes to every invitation, consume new techniques every day, and measure yourself by how many tabs you can keep open without collapsing. Your body signals with sweet dispersion, shallow breathing, warmth in your hands that doesn't become presence, a mind racing to retrieve all possibilities at once. Response latency drops to seconds because you feel like you need to hold everything before it slips away, and screen time soars as if it were oxygen. When this happens, the frequency seems high, but the dial is buzzing, and coincidences become unsustainable peaks. Shutting down out of defense is the opposite and equally costly response. You protect yourself by discrediting what you love, transforming invitations into threats of draining, and outsourcing the how to an ideal future where nothing disturbs you. Your body signals with silent coldness, a clenched jaw, an immobile chest, a gaze that searches for error before finding a fit. Latency stretches for days, even when it matters, because the delay acts as an umbrella against frustration, and screen time becomes an anesthetic that feels like rest and only delays decisions. At this extreme, the field doesn't close out of malice. It simply can't find you because you turn off the headlights. At its core, modulation is about holding a long note without breaking. The test is empirical. If, after 2 minutes of intentional silence, your shoulders and jaw drop and your breathing gains cadence, you're in a position to choose calmly. If not, it's time to adjust before acting. In everyday life, this translates into windows of focus that don't exceed 90 minutes and responses that are neither reflexive nor procrastinative. A half hour to 3 hours for what's emotionally relevant usually preserves dignity for both parties. Screen time becomes a tool, not a diet. You decide on finite blocks and revise like someone tuning the dial, not like someone punishing themselves for having a sensitive body. Use the map as a compass, not a whip. When you realize you've opened too much, reduce stimulation for a short cycle and see if the tension returns to levels that allow for curiosity. When you notice you've closed out of defense, reopen a minimal channel where there's safe reciprocity and accept a small, precise discomfort in exchange for presence. With each micro-adjustment, track the 3 markers: body, screen, latency. When 2 of them return to center, the third usually follows. This is how Manifestation 2.0 stops being theory. The field doesn't need drama, just a stable signal long enough to locate you. And this begins when you trade the rush of how for the elegance of modulating the gift. From now on, I modulate. I neither numb nor overflow. This decision isn't bravado, it's a change of order. Instead of using force to push the world, I adjust my dial so the world finds me without unnecessary friction. When the inner note sustains its own music, the shortest path appears as a consequence and not a miracle. And the body recognizes that presence is a criterion, not rhetoric. This is where the road forks, and gifting stops breaking you through excess or defensiveness because management takes precedence over haste. Feeling is the secret returns with a new weight when you understand that feeling isn't about inflating emotion, it's about balancing coherence. The quote calls for fine-tuning, not extremes, but about cultivating a state your body can carry while walking, working, and talking. The field responds to the combination of clear intention and breathable affection, and this combination only holds when you choose millimeters over jerks. What changes then isn't the size of the dream, it's the texture of the step that brings you closer without burning out the circuit. Understand now how the decision reorganizes invisible habits. Notifications lose their role as conductor. Silences cease to be threats and become a space for reading. And conversations with those who matter exchange proof for presence. You don't become slow, you become legible. This legibility is what allows people and circumstances to recognize your lane without you having to raise signs. It's the kind of clarity that invites coincidences to become commitments, because your signal no longer wavers at the whim of fear. If this, write it in the comments to anchor the state. I see now, or I'll never let this happen again, or I modulate the gift. Writing this down isn't an empty ritual. It's a public commitment to the management you've decided to practice from today onward. And if this map works for you, sign up now to receive the next layers in this series, because consistency likes a calendar and a community that speaks the same language. The algorithm understands numbers. The field understands coherence. The two together accelerate what has already begun here. To close the turning point with a step forward, he saves this sentence as a bridge to practice. Now, the practical protocol: verbs, time, and criteria. Next, I'll show you the procedure that brings the decision down to everyday life in testable steps, from the first minute of breathing to the tender limit that protects your access without creating confrontation. What follows is operational by design and will bring you relief quickly enough to prove to yourself that modulation works on the clock, not just in idea. When the method enters, the field stops seeming mysterious and becomes the light engineering of everyday life.
Now, the protocol that transfers the decision to the clock: 3 verbs with each a clear time and criteria. The idea is to generate relief and clarity in minutes, not weeks, because the field recognizes sustained stability, not peaks of enthusiasm. You'll slow down for a minute, cut the input by 10, and establish a final limit in a complete sentence, always checking the 3 framework markers: body, screen, and latency. When 2 of these hands return to the center, the third usually follows. And it is from this synchronicity that frictionless action arises. First, slow down for 60 seconds. Close your eyes and breathe in a 4-4-6 pattern: 4 counts in, 4 counts of gentle pause, and 6 counts out, focusing on the heart area, as if the air were entering and exiting through it. The criterion is physical and unequivocal. Shoulders drop 0.5 centimeter, jaw unclenches, and the warmth in the hands increases without trembling. If none of